Hi, my name is Emily Hernandez,
And my name is Jasmine Ordaz.
and today we're going to talk to you about the issue with fast fashion in quarantine.
So, what is fast fashion? Fast fashion is where clothing companies combine two techniques: quick response manufacturing and dynamic assortment. So, in simpler terms, these companies are delivering knockoff designs of brands quickly. For example, I'm pretty sure we've all seen the trends of the neon clothing, off the shoulder, and butterfly shirts, right? These have all formed part of past trends.
Now, what is the issue with fast fashion? Well, fast fashion mostly touches on human abuse, air pollution, water pollution, and climate change. To go more into it, we're going to talk about topics such as child labor, toxic chemicals being released in both the air and drinkable water resources, and how fast fashion is the leading producer of CO2 production.
As the New York Times stated, immigrant workers in Los Angeles today who are victims of wage theft and exploitation, not to mention the Bangladeshi, Chinese, Vietnamese, and other laborers who face working conditions that are at best grim and at worst inhumane.
Now, the biggest example and most impactful example of all was in 2013 in Bangladesh at the Rana Plaza factory. It collapsed one day, and the collapsible explosion killed 1,100 people, and it also injured another 2,500. This wasn't the first time Bangladesh faced such a crisis. Between 2006 and 2012, more than 500 Bangladeshi garment workers died in factory fires, according to the New York Times.
The ILO, or the International Labor Organizations, estimates that about 170 million are engaged in child labor, with many making textiles and garments to satisfy the demand of consumers in Europe, the US, and beyond. Fast fashion is pushing companies to find ever cheaper sources of labor, such as children. Children are seen as obedient workers who tend to slip under the radar, making it very simple to manage them.
Some of these children are considered lucky enough to work inside of the factories. Why? Because they get shelter from the conditions outside. However, many of these factories actually don't even have basic safety regulations, such as even having a fire extinguishers in the building in case of an emergency. Now, some of the unluckier kids are forced to go into cotton picking. Prefers they prefer to hire children for their small fingers because it not only makes it easier for them to pick the cotton, but they also don't damage the crop as much. Now these children face long working hours in conditions either rain or shine. They are exposed to pesticides which harm their growing bodies, and they're often paid below minimum wage.
So, going back to what Emily said about pesticides, I wanted to add on to that and start discussing the amount of water and air pollution that the fashion industry is creating. The fashion industry is a major consumer of water. For example, huge quantities of fresh water are being used for dyeing and finishing process for all of our clothes. In most of the countries in which garments are produced, untreated toxic wastewaters from textiles factories are dumped directly into the river. So now we're going to bring a guest speaker majoring in biological sciences at the University of California, Irvine, giving us an insight on some of these topics. So the first question is, as you know, many of these clothing factories dump harmful chemicals into bodies of water such as rivers. Now, what aspects of life could the chemicals end up affecting in the long run?
Okay, so thank you for having me. So the main thing when we're thinking about how a water system is going to affect the environment is the fact that within biology, everything is going to kind of be interconnected. So these big factories, corporations, right? They're going to be dumping in chemicals into the water, which essentially means that everything downstream from there is going to be affected. This is just going to be a cascade. So essentially, the humans that live downstream, the vegetation that lives along the riverbanks, all the organisms that feed and grow in these areas, they're all going to be affected and so forth. Because the humans, think about them. If they bathe, use this as a water source, well, now we're going to start to see diseases, right? The diseases that are going to start happening on skin, on lesions, right? It's just going to kind of start a cesspool. And then not just that, all this water intake, it's going to cause internal damage to the organs, right? The kidneys, the liver especially. And then also the organisms outside of this area, right? Living along the riverbanks, all the organisms that feed on the vegetation, and then so forth on the next chain of command, the organisms that eat those. So we're going to start to see these chemicals even in the predatory animals surrounding these areas, and it's just going to affect and go on so forth.
Okay, thank you. So chemicals are actually one of the main components in our clothes. The heavy use of chemicals in cotton farming is causing diseases and premature death among cotton farmers.
Benzothiazole is a chemical formula that is used in textile materials. It can be actually released from the textile material, penetrate through the skin, and further enter the human body, which is in the case of many laborers right now. Going back to your guest speaker, how would benzothiazole affect the bodies of laborers?
So with this chemical, the main thing we have to realize is that it's an irritant and it comes from rubber, right? From plastics. So essentially, it's going to affect us in two ways. One, respiratory, and then secondly, like you said, it's going to affect us because it penetrates through the skin. Well, one, through the lungs, the way we can think about this is within gas exchange, we're hitting cell to cell communication right here. So as we take a normal breath, we expect oxygen, et cetera, to come in. Well, now we have a foreign chemical, a molecule that we don't know how big the size is, and it's going to be interfering with this process. It's going to be interrupting the chemical process of oxygen or gas exchange, oxygen coming in, CO2 coming out. So it's going to cause irritation there. We're going to see this then in turn affect long-term respiration. So the lungs could be damaged in long term, as well as because it's affecting the skin. Well, when toxins enter the skin, it's the job of the circulatory system, right? Your bloodstream to take those out. Well, then guess what? Now this is going to start affecting your bladder, your kidney, because it needs to expel this chemical that wasn't in the body. It's a foreign substance. So in actuality, this chemical now acts as a carcinogen, which means it could potentially lead to cancer.
Thank you. Now, going off of the chemicals that are being used in the textiles, we would like to also talk about the topic of climate change. Now, this is a quote from the show The Patriot Act, said and hosted by Hasimiha. The clothes in your suitcase are screwing up the planet more than the flight that you put them on. And this is true because the textile production is one of the most polluting industries. It produces about 1.2 billion tons of CO2 per year, which is more emissions than international flights and maritime shipping. Not only that, but some clothing pieces like jackets can use up to 10,330 liters of drinking water to make that one piece of clothing. Also, synthetic fabric is even worse to create. It takes about 342 million barrels of oil just to use and make synthetic fabric, such as leggings. Now, going back to our guest speaker one last time, how important is it really to try and get people and industries alike to try and lower CO2 emissions?
So, like I said before, within biology, it's just this idea of it's a very large system with interconnected parts. So we saw how just pollution at the level of a river can be damaging. Well, now when we speak of climate change and CO2, well, we're starting to see with CO2, it's the idea of greenhouse gases, right? Increasing the temperature of the planet. Well, on a global scale, what we're seeing is that um, by temperatures rising, we're going to see that, yes, sea levels will rise because ice caps are melting, and yes, habitats will be damaged. But in a bigger way, when we take this all across the world, we have to realize, well, there are organisms that operate within certain parameters. And yes, organisms can adapt, but the way the human race is doing things right now is we are increasing the temperature way too fast where organisms cannot catch up. So the biggest example here is the coral reefs. These have enzymes that operate within very specific parameters. And by increasing these temperatures, we are literally killing these animals. And guess what? The coral reefs die. Well, all the animals that inhabited these areas are going to die, and so on and so forth. So we hurt the planet, we hurt animals on it. We are eventually going to start hurting ourselves because of food source and other stuff. So honestly, this pollution are things that we very much need to pay attention to.
Thank you to our guest speaker, Marcus Hernandez.
Thank you.
So polyester and other synthetic materials, the emissions for production are much higher as they are produced from fossil fuels such as crude oil, which is, by the way, not renewable. 60% of all clothing produced is disposed of within a year of production, from stores such as H&M, Forever 21, and Instagram boutiques. Clothes from these little stores and boutiques are changed out very quickly, such as Zara, which has been known to produce 500 new articles of clothing per minute. For example, while usual stores have new clothing for seasons like fall, winter, spring, and summer, H&M has 52 seasons, producing new clothing each week. This increase of clothing leads to many of it going to landfills in the end. Only less than 1% of material used to produce clothing is actually recycled within the clothing industry, while around 13% being recycled for use in other areas.
Now, you all might be wondering, as of this moment, how can we stop the effects of the fashion industry? Well, recycling, supporting brands that recycle plastics into fabric and clothing that reduces their carbon footprint really helps, such as supporting brands such as Patagonia, which first started making polyester fleece jackets from recycled bottles in 1993. Not only can you help support those brands, but you can also wear one article of clothing 9 months longer. And that one article of clothing can help reduce the carbon footprint for the garment by 30%. Not only can you do that, but you can also buy one used item per year from resellers, and it could end up saving nearly 6 pounds of CO2 emissions.
And remember, it's okay to love to shop the latest trends, but do so less frequently and try to shop more from thrift shops. An alternative is also supporting businesses that recycle. You should choose organic fibers and natural fibers that don't require chemicals to be produced, or sustainable brands. Something to keep an eye out for is garments with certification labels controlling chemical content such as OEKO-TEX, GOTS, or Blue Sign.
Now, these are just some of the major problems in the 2.4 trillion a year industry that me and Jasmine have wanted to bring to attention. We not only want to spread awareness to those in classrooms or not to those only interested in fashion settings, but to those that are also interested in economics, human rights, and climate policy. We hope that with spreading awareness, our peers will make smarter decisions beginning with their clothing, and that we will all one day unite to put a stop to this damaging mannerism of the fashion industry. Thank you.